so much for your kind words. I appreciate it. It's my honor to be here, to be with you. I kind of feel a little bit like Jesus is confronted with his disciples. I have much to say to you, but you cannot bear it now. It's just too much to cover, you would think, almost, in terms of all that we want to look at. Here's what my point will be. My point will, let's turn the volume down just a little bit. My point will be that we have not looked at the history of interpretation of Revelation. We've read too many commentaries on Revelation. We've got too many ideas circulating, and we're not focused on what we can learn from history. And I'm going to try to take you through 2,000 years of history of interpreting Revelation. And that's an awesome task to try to get through. But stay with me. I hope to bless you. I hope to leave you with a blessing. I hope that you will have something that you can take away with you tonight that you will be haunted by, and it will cause you to think and think and think and think. If I can cause you to think after this event, I have accomplished my goal. Not that you would believe everything I say, but I have turned the gears in your mind. I have caused you to think. I have gotten you out of that relaxed mode of thinking you know something that you don't actually know. So we're going to go through the history of interpretation to try to learn what we can learn about dead-end streets of interpreting this book. We've already been there, done that. And we just don't recognize we've been there and done that over and over and over again. It's kind of like the guy who goes to the doctor and he says, "Doctor, when I beat my head against the wall, it hurts. What should I do?" And the doctor says, "Don't do that." That's the solution. Don't go down that dead-end street anymore. You don't need to. It's just simply going to hurt you. So what are you confronted with? Unlike any other book in the New Testament, the book of Revelation is like this. This is what you are going to get with the book of Revelation. That is to say, no other New Testament book in the book of Revelation, there's no other New Testament book that is going to present you like the apocalypse for its tsunami wave of interpretive history crashing down upon you before you even read the first verse. No good exegete of the book has ignored a serious study of its history of interpretation. So, number one, the first thing I want to do is I want you to overview the sources upon which John drew his images and his basic apocalyptic constructs to draw only one important conclusion I need you to take with you about John's apocalyptic genre, the form of writing that he is doing. This genre is not like other genres. It's not like narrative. It's not like epistle. It's a different form of literature. And interpretively, that means you have to read it differently according to its form. So, first of all, let's overview the sources upon which John drew. We can look at the basic empires that have dealt with producing this literature called apocalyptic. It's not exclusive to Jews. It's not exclusive to Christianity. Apocalyptic literature, as a matter of fact, was a strong movement in the ancient world, especially from 200 BC to 200 AD, when we get most of our apocalyptic literature. It's coming out of these empires and their impact. Now, how it affected Jews was, it was their oppression by the surrounding empires, such as Babylon, Persia, Greek, and Rome. So what we want to look at is the development that's occurring in these different empires. First of all, we've got the destruction that's the Babylonian Empire. You see it in Ezekiel. You have apocalyptic elements in Ezekiel. And the two main ideas that Ezekiel teaches you about things that John is just inheriting from his environment are the concept of New Jerusalem and the concept of resurrection. If Babylon destroyed Jerusalem, what would you want? A New Jerusalem. Of course. It's historically driven. That's where the concept of a New Jerusalem comes from. And then you have the idea of resurrection, which is a belief that it's not evident strongly in the Old Testament, but it is all over the place in the New Testament, and it is in this time period of apocalyptic literature that belief in resurrection starts to become something more common. Then you have the Persian period and the return from exile, this restoration. But while they were in Babylon, while they were then in Persia, as Persia had conquered them, they were exposed to Zoroastrianism. And in Zoroastrianism, there is a rhetoric that is used to describe the forces of evil arrayed against the forces of good. In Zoroastrianism, that main rhetoric is light, darkness. And Jews picked up on that rhetoric of light, darkness. And so the forces of good are light, and the forces of bad are darkness. And so Jews in that little community called Qumran that produced the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of their main products, one of their main pieces of literature, they were an apocalyptic movement in Israel. And one of their main pieces of literature is titled The War of the Sons of Light Against the Sons of Darkness. So you see picking up in Judaism this light-darkness kind of rhetoric. And also, this idea of a final battle is not New Testament exclusive. If you think there's some idea of a final battle in the New Testament, it's actually being absorbed from Zoroastrianism. Because in Zoroastrianism, that is the main point of Zoroastrian eschatology, is how are we going to solve all this? How does the problem of evil get solved? Now, you need to know how to answer that question. I could ask you, how do you solve the problem of evil? How does God solve the problem of evil in the world He created? Now, what He created was good. In the beginning, God created, blah, 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 blah. And God said it is good. But what we have is bad. How do we get there? Evil. There's this serpent. We don't know how to explain him. He's just there. We don't have an explanation for why evil is in the world, but we do have to deal with it. It's part of our lives. And what you need to know is, you need to nail down, how does God conquer evil? And I'll slip you an answer real quick. If He doesn't do it at the cross, He's not going to do it at Armageddon. That's New Testament. You need to think about it. But this idea of a final battle is not integral to New Testament theology. It actually comes from Zoroastrianism. And then when you look at the Greek conquest, Hellenization is what's taking place here. The book of Daniel is our premier evidence for what's going on. We have angels and demons and empire images. It is from this time period where apocalyptic starts to use what we call zoomorphism. Animals formed to represent humans. Zoomorphism. And that animal formed to represent a human is no secret, no mystery. You have a beast, it's a king or his kingdom. Boom, just like that. You have a beast, it's a king or his kingdom. No secret, no mystery. There's nothing to solve here. You got a beast, you got a king or his kingdom. And that's where these empire images are starting to be picked up. Then in the Roman Empire, you have patronage, where the problem is you've got Jews in bed with Romans because the Sadducees want to preserve their temple, and so they're going to be all in favor of the Romans and do everything they can to satisfy the Roman conquerors. Whereas the Pharisees and others are not happy with the Romans. But this problem of collusion, this problem of being as a consort to evil is a huge problem. And so you have this illustrated in 2 Baruch and in 2nd Esdras. You have this collusion with the power of evil, and that then brings us to the First Jewish War, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. So look at all of this, and you look at these ideas: New Jerusalem, resurrection, light, darkness, final battle, angels, demons, empire images, collusion, First Jewish War, and what do you have? You have a simple conclusion. Take this home. John's images are not mysterious. We know both their sources and their meanings. Asserting they are mysteries requiring a prophet to reveal them is deceptive. You do not need a false prophet to interpret the book of Revelation. What you need is a solid understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ. That interprets the book. If it doesn't, we never should have canonized it. Think about it. If the gospel does not interpret the book of Revelation, we should have never canonized the book of Revelation. It's that simple, gang. You do not need a false prophet to tell you some, quote, mystery about what this means. Because there's no mystery in the first place. Secondly, the Jewish war paradigmatically reveals early on how historical events always have driven apocalyptic interpretation. That's another thing you need to understand. In the history of interpretation, historical events drive interpretation, and they determine our interpretation. So you look at the first Jewish war, destructive, terrible, horrible. It took Judaism down. It ended the nation. It destroyed that countryside. It destroyed Judea. It destroyed Jerusalem. It destroyed the temple. There was no Judaism after the war, except that the Pharisees reinvented Judaism because they were the only surviving sect after the war. So what makes a Jew? You didn't have your Essenes at Qumran to say the answer. You didn't have the Sadducees to say the answer. The only one left to tell you the answer of what makes a Jew is a Pharisee. And so the Pharisees survived the war. In Jamnia, they had a council and they put themselves together and reinvented Judaism. And that's where you get Judaism of today. First Jewish war. Huge. Can you imagine what it would be like? Come on, just think about it, gang. It's not your nation, it's not your city, it's not your temple, so there's no feeling in your heart for what I'm saying. But what if I said, Russia bombed Washington, D.C., killed off all of our leaders, bombed several other major cities, invaded, and completely destroyed anything we ever knew as America? What would your life be like? What would you do? What would you say? And so this is the problem of the first Jewish war. It was huge. It was world-changing. And you've got to understand that there was a world that came to an end on that day. It was the world of Judaism. And it came to an end on that day. The world didn't exist for Judaism after that day. But you can see various responses. Now here's the historical event. What's going to happen is apocalyptic responds to the historical event. That is, it is reactive, it is not proactive. The first Jewish war from AD 66 to 70 is the poster child illustration that apocalyptic images from any apocalyptic literature simply provides a canvas upon which we can paint current historical events to try to interpret our own times and our own dramatic events. Look at Qumran's response to the apocalyptic developments of this first Jewish war. We move from Pesher to politics here. Their commentary on the prophet Habakkuk illustrates an important Pesher method that all readers of Revelation would do well to understand. Pesher is a Hebrew word. Being interpreted, this means. That's basically what Pesher means. And so your interpreter at Qumran would be reading Habakkuk, and he would give a Pesher on Habakkuk. And he says, being interpreted, this means, the prophet means. And then he would talk about something that was happening right then with Romans, the Roman Empire, their collusion with the Hasmonean dynasty. He would be talking about John Hyrcanus I or John Hyrcanus II or something like that. So here is the kind of interpretation where what you do is you read the headlines in your newspaper and then go find a verse to try to make that verse fulfilled. That's Pesher interpretation. It's been happening for 2,000 years. That is the way that this Qumran community was responding. Their commentary illustrates this Pesher method that all readers of Revelation would do well to understand. This way of reading the text is simple. Contemporize the prophetic text by completely ignoring the original historical context of the prophet and his audience. Instead, simply equate any given prophetic text with any current news. In this way, the inhabitants of Qumran could convert any verse in Habakkuk in today's news about the Romans and their lackeys, the Hasmonean client kings that were so despised who controlled the high priesthood. In terms of Revelation's apocalyptic traditions, one can witness this Pesher way of reading today's headlines back into prophetic text, repeating itself over and over throughout the centuries of church history, and especially today on internet websites. You ought to be suspicious at the snap of a finger the first time somebody tells you that what you're reading in the headlines of the Wall Street Journal is some prophecy in the book. You ought to be suspicious. Because it's been done for years and years and years. Qumran reflects the perpetual apocalyptic impulse to make one's own time the end time. In a way, they are precursors of historicist periodizers and futurist signs of the times preachers, beguiling gullible audiences, but constantly contradicted by history as history goes on. But then you have the Christian response to the Jewish war. Christians were easily identifying this cataclysmic event as the prelude to the end of the world. That's part of the reason why Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke. He was trying to counteract and redirect Christian speculations about the world's end spurred by the destruction of Jerusalem. Luke redirects believers to the departing command of Jesus to his disciples to be his witnesses to preach the kingdom to the ends of the earth. That redirection of the end of the world speculation is the whole point of Acts 1:8. And you shall be my witnesses. Jews also struggled to interpret the significance of these dramatic and life-changing events. The post-war period of AD 70 to 80 saw a flurry of new Jewish apocalypses trying to interpret this disastrous results of the First Jewish War. A great example is Second Esdras, the three-headed eagle vision being one of the most famous visions in Second Esdras. You don't know Second Esdras, but that's too bad. Most King Jamesers don't know that Second Esdras was in the original King James. Often quoted by early church fathers, received as scripture in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and preserved in Roman Catholic traditions, the text of Second Esdras was included in early King James editions. Stylistic patterns in Second Esdras reoccur in Revelation. These elements include symbolic imagery, repetitive use of the number 7, and figuring a woman as representative of a city. All the material clearly is working out an interpretation of the disaster of the First Jewish War, in which Rome reprises ancient Babylon's role of destroying Jerusalem and its temple. So that's what we learn, that this kind of historical event happens, and then apocalypses are written. Apocalypses are responding to history. A historical event happens, and then we're trying to understand it with our apocalypses. And that is one of the main motivations. Now, my third point tonight is that we need to walk through the development of John's traditions to let you know that Ecclesiastes was right. There's nothing new under the sun. It just simply isn't. We review the history of interpretation of Revelations, show recurring themes upon which to make general observations in the historical development of John's traditions. So let's look at those. We have 8 periods to look at. The patristic, Constantine, millennium, and crusades here are before us now. Let's go first to the patristic interpretation. This is from the 100 to 300s approximately, up to the time maybe of about Constantine. One of the main things you need to learn about this period of interpretation of Revelation is Kelia. Kelia is the Greek word for 1,000. And so this is that 1,000. Early there was fascination with 1,000. It was propagated in Jewish martial apocalyptic traditions, adopted indiscriminately by second century church fathers, thereby becoming unknown partners in the very militaristic, materialistic attitudes that blinded Jews to Messiah's true nature as revealed in Jesus and his death on the cross in the first place. Chiliasm forever imprinted a militaristic Messiah image on the tapestry of Revelation's history of interpretation from which Christian hermeneutics never recovered. If you have a militaristic image of what the second coming must look like, I'm here to tell you, you need to rethink, because you're getting ready to deny the gospel. All that we need to know about who Messiah is and what he wants to do, what he came to do, and what he did accomplish, all we need to know is already revealed. And it's not going to change. It's called the gospel. And the gospel has one storyline, and that is that Messiah must be persecuted by many of religious leaders and suffer and die, and on the third day be raised again from the grave. You've got to bring that theological truth to your understanding of Revelation. So, if someone paints a militaristic picture of who Jesus is at the second coming, be careful that you don't create a schizophrenic Messiah who doesn't really have a clue how to deal with evil. Because at first he thought he might do this. But then what? Later he changed his mind? And now he's got to zap you with his rays? Marshal some M1 tanks? And some Uzi submachine guns? Have you go to battle and go to war? Messiah is not martial. He's not militaristic. Learn from Chiliasm. That comes from Jewish apocalypses that Christians in the second century absorbed without thinking about it, and they thereby betrayed the gospel because they turned Jesus into a general, not a savior. We don't need a general. We need a savior. Be careful. Montanus was a second century self-proclaimed prophet of Phrygia, claiming New Jerusalem would be established on earth in Paphos of Phrygia. Montanus' idea of New Jerusalem on earth continually reincarnates itself, as in Melchior Hoffmann's Strasbourg, France, or John Mathis Munster, Germany, or Jonathan Edwards' Colonial New England, or Joseph Smith's Salt Lake City, Utah. So this idea of New Jerusalem coming true on earth is going to crop up over and over again. That's what Montanus teaches us. So we move to the Constantine period. Oh boy, do things really get turned over. The apple cart just gets thoroughly turned over here. Constantine converted. Oh my gosh! We have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. Because up to this time, for 300 years, everyone had taught that the book of Revelation's beast was Rome. And in a way they were right, because that is what John meant. I can explain that in a little while. But when the beast was converted, what do? You got a huge problem. an interpretive problem on your hand. Conversion provoked interpretive convulsions with Revelation. For hundreds of years, the beast clearly was Rome. Now, clearly not. The rhetorical solution was to manipulate the topos of time. Change the time frame from now to not now in one of two ways. Deferred timing is one. A deferred timing is where you displace the prophetic fulfillment somewhere beyond where you are. The displaced future advanced by periodizing to AD 500 took care of it for 200 years because it wasn't 300s, it was in the 500s. That was well beyond the time of Constantine, but that set up the last emperor myth before Christ's return, beginning all periodizing interpretive schemes, all of them arbitrary. Or, instead of deferred timing, like let's just defer it a little bit, you have symbolic timing. This was Augustine's brilliant solution. Symbolic timing is eliminating time altogether out of the interpretive equation, and he called it amillennialism, or we began to call it amillennialism. He didn't. The eternal city moves from Rome to New Jerusalem out in an unknown future. Revelation's images are mapped onto Christian experience, and the Catholic Church sanctioned this view at the Council of Ephesus in AD 431, so this is the official view of the Catholic Church. It's symbolic, it just is interpretive of the human Christian experience and baptism and so on and so forth. Then you move to the time of the millennium. Oh man, that is really something. So in the time of the millennium, as you're getting up to the 1000s, what we have is the teaching of Bede, the English monk, from 672 to 735, reading literally against Augustine. He used a deferred timing, but he got new calculations in there. Instead of using Anno Mundi, he now used Anno Domini. Instead of using the beginning of the world, he used the beginning since Christ, displacing fulfillment to the 800s. Perfectly playing into Charlemagne's politics for his Carolingian Empire that united Western and Central Europe, where there was this myth that Charlemagne was the last emperor before Christ's return. Then you have an important figure. You've never heard the name of this dude. His name is Adzo of Montier-en-Der, 992. He wrote a biography of Antichrist, revealing the legendary figure already has fixed features by this time in Christian interpretation, none of them biblical, including a strong dose of anti-Semitism. Watch very carefully your Antichrist rhetoric, because in Christian history it has served the purposes of anti-Semitism. Pope Sylvester, the turn of the first Christian millennium in AD 1000, new periodizing schemes, imminence fever. Oh man, this has to be it. The year 1000, that's 1000. I mean, this is a millennium. I mean, it has to be now. That would be perfect, wouldn't it? 1,000 years of the Roman Empire, 1,000 years of the church, or some such discussion like, oh, the year 1000 has to be it. So there was this imminence fever. Everybody was looking for the end in 1000. So we had new periodizing schemes with this imminence fever for Pope Sylvester's last Eucharist of AD 999, showing how popular belief always has overwhelmed exegetical prudence in the interpretation of Revelation. You don't want to hear the truth, you just want it to be true in your generation. So then we move to the Crusades, 1000s, 1200s. Here's where anti-Semitism is becoming just really a major feature of interpretation of Revelation. Crusades show how rank anti-Semitism always has shadowed Revelation's interpretive history. Crusader armies, for example, as they were marching down the Rhine Valley on their way to the Holy Land to establish the New Jerusalem, were massacring Jews along the way. Because we know they are Antichrist. Because they killed Christ. So we know that's Antichrist. And thousands of Jews were martyred at this time, on our way to establish the New Jerusalem. Hildegard of Bingen, a German Benedictine abbess, mystic and visionary from 1098 to 1179, reading literally against Augustine, periodizing to AD 1160 as her solution to church corruption, which she was very concerned about. Her problems that she painted onto the apocalyptic canvas was church corruption, and she wanted to resolve that. She advances new elements to the Antichrist legend with her artwork, and she made anti-Semitism integral to the Antichrist myth. And then we have Joachim of Fiore. Excuse me. Let me go back. Then we have Joachim of Fiore. Now, this guy was called by the scholar Bernard McGinn the most important apocalyptic thinker of the whole medieval period. Reading literally against Augustine, he periodized to AD 1260, which is 100 years past what Hildegard periodized to. Like Hildegard, looking for church renewal. Signs of the times for Joachim of Fiore are the Crusades. That's proof of God marshaling his armies to get ready to establish New Jerusalem, and the development of the monastic orders, which all shows how signs of the times always magically conform to the times, regardless the century. Then we have the Reformation. And in the Reformation of the 1500s, a literal approach moves from backstage and being Hildegard and Joachim of Fiore to center stage, producing another interpretive scheme focused on the millennium, as with amillennialism, but with the predictable emphasis on predicting the time, invoking yet another periodizing scheme called premillennialism. Luther's apocalyptic art and the newly invented Gutenberg printing press powerfully communicated his ideas to the masses. The first instance of social media advancing interpretive schemes. Antichrist slander becomes integral to anti-papacy rhetoric. Once again, Rome is the beast, but this time it's papal Rome. Without guardrails, premillennialism provokes social and political chaos among radical Anabaptists, such as Hoffman and Mathis, and the infamous Munster Rebellion, in which hundreds died. New Jerusalems are proclaimed at this time, but every one of them fizzles. What's the Catholic response to Luther's anti-Pope, anti-Christ rhetoric? Well, Catholics reciprocate the rhetoric and turn around and say, Protestants are antichrist. But then they also again defer to timing solutions, such as in the futurism of the Jesuit professor Francisco Rivera of 1591 and the preterism of the Jesuit Luis de Alcazar in 1613. Here's what's ironic. Catholic futurism. Futurism is invented by Catholics. Catholic futurism, invented to counter Protestant interpretation of the Reformation, becomes the mainstay of later Protestant premillennial approaches, such as in dispensationalism, for example. So then we move to colonial America, the 1600s to 1700s. Persecuted Puritans seeking to purify the Church of England optimistically saw in the astounding bounty of virgin forest and rich wildlife of colonial America the promise of a new world with a literal New Jerusalem on earth. Famous preachers such as Jonathan Edwards produced another interpretive scheme focused on the millennium, as with amillennial and premillennialism, but this time postmillennialism. The First Great Awakening inspires ideas of a church successfully evangelizing the world and Christ coming to celebrate a job well done afterwards. So then we move to the Revolutionary War. The Pope finally gets a reprieve because Antichrist now is King George III. The Pope gets a reprieve as Antichrist slander shifts to King George III, King of England, and the English Parliament Stamp Act of 1765 becomes the mark of the beast. I mean, it was literal. I mean, the mark of the beast is You can't buy or sell anything. You can't trade. You can't do commerce without the mark of the beast. And that's exactly what the Stamp Act was. You couldn't buy or sell or trade or do commerce without the stamp. And that's the mark of the beast. Oh, it was perfect. You know that's what Revelation was talking about, right? With the mark of the beast. It was that Stamp Act of 1765. From postmillennialism, millennial rhetoric goes civic. That is, it gets worked into civic discourse, political discourse. And it becomes integral to American political discourse. Anytime you hear the thought, America has a special destiny, that's apocalyptic rhetoric. That comes from apocalyptic discourse. America having some special destiny in God's millennial plans. This is later expressed literally in the first line of the Civil War's battle hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. America's millennial destiny, even later, is picked up again by Joseph Smith and the Mormons. So, speaking of the Mormons, that brings us to industrial America of the 1800s. Colonial America inspired creation of a new scheme of postmillennialism, later innovated further by Joseph Smith and his Mormon movement. He saw God's eschatological hand in the American Indians as the lost tribes of Israel, and Salt Lake City, way out west in the Utah Territory, as the New Jerusalem of millennial destiny. His post-millennial views included the consequent civic millennial rhetoric. Then we have Millerism. On the prophetic wave of the Second Great Awakening, William Miller inspired a movement numbering in the thousands with false calculations leading to false predictions of the end of the world between March 1843 and March 1844, falsified by history. That failure only inspired new calculations, pushing the date 1 month later to April 1844, which also failed. Buttressed, however, by new innovations. What can we do? We just try to recalculate. Let's get some things innovatively into the belief system, like an invisible return. Well, what we were talking about, it didn't really fail. What we were talking about was an invisible return. That's when Jesus returns to the holy tabernacle. So it was a partial return. It was an invisible. It happened, but it was invisible. So how can you know? How does that prove anything to you if it's invisible? How does it prove anything? But that's what they said. It was an invisible return. But then we have the heresy of 3 advents of Christ. We don't understand how when we throw these apocalyptic innovations into the mix, we just end up with heresy. Because in the New Testament, there are only 2 advents of Christ. That is all you get. You have the first advent, her name is Mary. And you have the second advent, that's the second coming. There are not 3 advents. Know your apostolic doctrine. There are only 2. If you have 3, something's off. Thousands left the movement, but Ellen G. White picked up all the leftover pieces of the Miller movement to create the Seventh-day Adventists, who, when they sneeze, splinter. So, we have Armstrong's Worldwide Church of God, the Jehovah's Witnesses, Branch Davidians, and more. Miller's failed predictions taught all later futurists and premillennialists to avoid date setting with the deceptive rhetoric of being precisely imprecise. Then we have, of course, in modern America, which is the 1800s into the 1900s, is usually calculated by historians as modern America, we have Darbyism. John Darby was a rejected prophet of the 1820s Plymouth Brethren movement of Dublin, Ireland. He migrated to a more hospitable and gullible 1800s American audience. He periodized in the innovative 7 dispensations of God's kingdom economy, and in the process advanced 2 salvation covenants, one for Jews, the other for Gentiles. He invented as well the great parenthesis myth based on Daniel 7:24 through 27, the famous 70-week imagery of the coming of the Anointed One after the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. This great parenthesis, so-called, was his asserted pause between weeks 69 and 70. The so-called pause of the eschatological clock ingeniously solved the problem of the theological elephant in the eschatological room. What is that theological elephant? 2 millennia of church history without the promised return of Jesus. Darby's futurism works only on another innovation, a secret rapture theory unknown to 2,000 years of Christian teaching on Revelation, and the precise reason why he was rejected by his own Plymouth brethren. In this way, like William Miller, with his secret rapture, Darby taught 3 advents of Christ, not the apostolic 2. His movement took off among evangelicals as America turned the corner into the 20th century because his literal reading made him an ally among evangelicals in countering modern liberal biblical critics, regardless of the maverick nature of his eschatological teachings. The stunning publishing success of the Scofield Reference Bible and its thoroughgoing dispensational notes based on Darby's maverick teachings turned this American innovation into a global phenomenon. So today, we have no new developments in America in apocalyptic. Almost everything we've got running today has come from the 17 and 1800s. There's nothing new now. But what we have is a repeat. Imminence theme. The end is now. The end is now. The end is now. The end is now. How many times can you say that and not get really bored pretty fast? The end is now. The end is now. The end is now. Imminence theme with signs of the time preaching and aberrant teachings such as multiple advents, maverick schemes, dual salvation covenants, and a schizophrenic Messiah who does not really know how to solve the problem of evil and is trying to do something different this time around. So observation number 1. Interpretation of Revelation from the beginning has been defined by a millennial rhetoric attempting to respond to history but completely missing John's emphasis. As I said in chapel, it's amazing to me that the word millennium in the entire Bible occurs only 4 times in one context of 4 consecutive verses. Only 4 times. Lamb is used 29 times, 28 times as a title for Jesus in heavily Christological context. Where do you really think John's emphasis is? For 2,000 years, we've been arguing millennium when John thought he was preaching Jesus Christ crucified. And we spent all of our time trying to decide, trying to peg this professor, this preacher, this summit. Is he amillennialist? Is he postmillennialist? Is he premillennialist? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. All those millennialisms, what we don't know is all those millennialisms were reactions to historical developments. They weren't interpretation of Revelation. We were taking our time, our problems, and putting it onto the canvas of Revelation and trying to work it out. Like Augustine trying to deal with the conversion of Constantine. And so he invents what is called amillennialism to handle the problem history was throwing at him. All millennial constructs are responding to history. They are not proactive, they are reactive. So, what am I? What are you, Dr. Stevens? I say a pox on all your houses. You can't peg me like that. I'm not amillennial. I'm not premillennial. I'm not postmillennial. Well, that means you're nothing. No, I'm gospel. I'm gospel. So I have a gospel understanding of what Revelation is all about. So I'm sorry, the history of interpretation tells me this is reactive stuff. It's not proactive exegesis. And so I'm not going to stay there. Go through it real quickly again. Chiasm, Jewish militant response to Roman imperialism, persecuted Christians absorbed as a millennial construct. Amillennialism, Augustine's response to Constantine's conversion that transformed Rome from beast to beauty. Premillennialism, Luther's response to an obdurate Roman church and the challenges of the Muslim onslaught. Postmillennialism, Edward's response to the New World promise and optimism of colonial America. Then America gets to contribute its own stuff, 19th century America, powerful reconfigurations of pre- and post-millennial constructs tailored to American audiences. Millerism, Miller's premillennial response to the Second Great Awakening with prophetic eminence preaching. Mormonism, Smith's postmillennial response to the American Indians and the New World promise of Utah. Darbyism, Darby's premillennial response to 2 millennia of church history without a return of Jesus. Observation number 2. History belies all timing schemes. Period. By definition, they beg the question. They presume the end before proving the end. All proposed signs of the times are falsified. Why do we not learn from history? Listen, gang, not one, I'll say it one more time, not one signs of the times. Since we have been preaching signs of the times, not one has been fulfilled. Not one. Why don't we learn? Why don't we learn? So, you have, well, when does Revelation get fulfilled? What's the prophetic fulfillment? Well, 3 major theories, or 4 major theories, are your idealist, your preterist, your historicist, and your futurist. Now, when you look at your preterist, you have some type of fulfillment in the past. Remember, preterism is invented by a Roman Catholic priest. Preterist is to say it's all fulfilled, and there's 3 time frames where this usually is: 70, because this is the destruction of Jerusalem; 95, because this is Domitian, the likely context for the writing of Revelation; and then 313, because of Constantine. So if you're preterist, those are the 3 major preterist positions that will revolve around that history, saying, well, it all got fulfilled back then. And then you have your historicist, who is looking at the present as, this is your periodizer. What they do is they periodize. They cut history into periods and divide it up, and then they say, we are in the last period. Interestingly enough, this is fascinating to me. All periodizers use only Western Civ for their periods of history. Somehow, for the coming of Jesus, Jesus doesn't care about Christianity in the Orient, or Christianity in Africa, or Christianity anywhere else in the world. The only way that Christianity has any importance is in Western Civ, because all your periodizers are Western Civ periodizers. They don't do anything with history of the Orient or history of anywhere else, just Europe. Mostly Europe. So it's Western history that they're periodizing. What do you mean by periodizing? Well, they take the timeline of history and divide it up into how many periods? Whatever they want. You know, whatever they want. I mean, Joachim of Fiore said 3. Why? Oh, because of the Trinity. I mean, literally, that was his reason. Why 3, Joachim? The Trinity, of course. So there are 3 periods of history or they're 5, or they're 7. Here's what happens, though, with all periodizers. Say Joachim's 3 periods of history. Well, Joachim already interpreted that he was in the 3rd period. And so, that's the interpreter's time frame. That's when everything's happening. We're in that 3rd period. We're right at the end. Oh, man, it's imminent. It's imminent. A periodizer is trying to prove to you it's imminent. It's right around the corner. Or take 5 periods and you do the same thing. You divide up history and you decide that you are in the 5th period. You're at the end. It's imminent and it's going to happen. And so you have your time bomb of the end going off then. Or take your 7 periods. Like the dispensationalists are real fond of this one because you have the 7 churches of Revelation. And they're not 7 churches according to a dispensationalist. Well, they are 7 churches. They say that. But then they also say, well, that's 7 periods of church history. That's the 7 periods of church history. You have those 7 churches. That's the church. Well, where are we? Well, where do you think we are? If you're a periodizer, we're always at the last one. So it doesn't matter, 3, 5, 7, it doesn't matter. You're always at the end, the interpreter's time. Here's an interesting thing. You go through all the periodizers that have ever been, including Luther and others, and not one of them have set up a period system and calculated they were in the middle of the period. Not a one of them. Which tells you rhetorically what they're trying to do. Rhetorically, they're trying to prove that you're at the end. That's why you're always, you've never heard a dispensationalist ever say that we are in the Ephesian period. It's always what? This is the Laodicean age. That's the last church, by the way, if you don't know your church numbers. That's the 7th one. That's the 7th one. We're in the Laodicean age. So you're always at the end. So these periodizing schemes, what's fascinating to me, this is real common in your historicist kind of interpretation. Then you have your futurist, all of the prophecy, all the prophetic and revelation is going to be fulfilled out there in the quote, end times calculation. And then finally you have your idealist, present, past, and future. So I don't think that we can get away from trying to say, where is Revelation fulfilled? So Dr. Stevens, where is Revelation fulfilled? Well, I'll give you a preterist futurist answer that is my best calculation. My preterist answer is Revelation is written for the 7 churches, and almost all that you read in Revelation is about the 7 churches, including the famous or infamous Battle of Armageddon, Revelation 16:16. There is a tie in that verse. It's in parentheses in your translation that ties it directly back to the letter to the church at Sardis. You've got to pay attention. You've got to love the text. You've got to know what the text says. Because John gives you the hook to understand what he's talking about in the Battle of Armageddon. He's talking about the issues that he dealt with in the church at Sardis. So this business of trying to peg where the fulfillment of Revelation is, I think most of Revelation, including up through 19, Revelation 19. That's the famous white horse. Yeah, the rider on the white horse. Ooh, that's the second coming. No. Why does that have to be the second coming? How is the rider described? As he's going forth to do battle, how is his robe described? His white robe. How is it described? John uses a word. His robe is baptized in blood. Now, the original Isaiah reference is sprinkled. That is, sprinkled with the blood of his enemies as he's cutting them down with his sword. But John says his robe, as he's going out to do that, already is baptized in blood. Don't forget what Jesus asked Peter. Are you able to be baptized with the baptism wherewith I am baptized? I'm here to tell you that I think exegesis suggests that the rider on the white horse is not the second coming. That's the first coming. Because that is how Jesus conquers evil. He baptizes himself unto his own blood. So, not even Revelation 19 do I think that we have something about the future. But you get to Revelation 20, and finally you get to a point where you have this great battle that's going to take place, Gog and Magog. It's at the end of Revelation 20, Gog and Magog. How do you know that's the end, Dr. Stevens? Because there's nothing else after it. I mean, you're giggling, but I'm telling you, love the text. Be familiar with the text. Know what the text says. What happens after Gog and Magog? Great white throne of judgment. Boom, over. Movie over. That's how I know it's the end. It's in the text. Love the text. She'll love you back. The text will interpret herself to you. And so that's why Dr. Stevens is just out there hanging on a limb. He's telling you that the rider on the white horse in Revelation 19 is not the second coming. He's saying that Revelation doesn't really have anything to do with the future. All of that stuff through 19 is about the 7 churches. But then there's Gog and Magog. Now here's what's important. With Gog and Magog, you have a description of Jerusalem being surrounded by all the armies of the earth. And there is this great cataclysm that takes place. Now here's what I think. This is what I call my passion millennial response. If you want to say, well, what is your millennial position? Well, it's none of the above, but I'll give you a passion millennial position. What did Jesus say to his disciples? He said, take up what? Yeah, and in Luke it's plural. Take up y'all's cross. And that is not dealing with your mother-in-law. I've heard that. Oh, I had to take up my cross today. I had to deal with my mother-in-law. Listen, gang, you know what one of the problems is? We might not be well served by our shepherds because they're not getting us ready. If anyone wants to come after me, let him take up his cross and follow me. How are you going to do that as a church? Here's what I think. It's crazy. I'm going to tell you it's crazy, but it's gospel. Here's what I think. I think Jesus said that because he's trying to get the church ready to do that. Because if you're following Christ, you will be persecuted. Because if you're following Christ, you will be misunderstood. Because if you're following Christ, there will come a point in time in history where you will be crucified. If you're following Christ. And I think Gog and Magog is the crucifixion of the church. And that's why I call it a passion millennial position. You say, well, how is that the salvation of the world? I don't have a clue. It's too deep for me. I cannot fathom God's mind. I don't know how that works. I just know that there's enough in the New Testament to tell me that the way that Jesus led us is the way he wants us to walk. And he said, take up y'all's cross and follow me. The question is, are you ready? Or are you just celebrating, oh, I'm not going to have to deal with anything. I'm going to get raptured. And I won't have to deal with anything. Really? Abandon the church mission? Abandon the call of Christ? Really? Really? Take up your cross and follow me. I think that there is a point where everything comes to a head in the end, but we will win by dying just like Christ. And the church, in its martyrdom, somehow, I don't know, I can't fathom the mind of God, but just like I can't fathom the cross. Come on. I really can't fathom it. I'm told by the Bible that saves me, and I believe Jesus Christ. I believe it. And God is a promise keeper. And he said, if you will believe in my Son, I will save you. I said, I'll take it. That's all. I don't understand the cross. But I do know I'm called to the cross-shaped existence for the church. So I do think there is a future. So I'm a preterist. I think most of Revelation is for the seven churches, but I'm a futurist. I think that there is a part of Revelation that is about the future, but it is not a future for which you are ready. Not if you're worried about premillennial, postmillennial, or amillennial. Observation number 3. Forcing a so-called literal reading on literature that by definition is symbolic, betrays notably confused semantics, and is riddled with contradictory applications. You have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that becomes the poster child of my illustration for this confused semantics and just riddled with contradictions. Here's a famous preacher, well-known, dispensationalist, and this is what he said in an interview. I don't believe, talking about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in Revelation 6, 1 through 8, I don't believe they are allegorical. I don't believe they are metaphoric. Sick, meaning that's what he actually meant was metaphorical. I don't believe they are metaphoric. I believe they are factual. I believe that there will be 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that will represent 4 different specific times of terror that will come upon the earth in rapid succession. Well, this is really weird. I don't believe they are metaphoric, or really metaphorical. But 2 sentences later, he makes it metaphorical. I don't believe they are metaphoric, but then what does he say? They represent. Boom! That's metaphor. What? Your semantics is so confused. You're riddled with contradictions. And that's the problem of insisting that Revelation must be interpreted literally. Because you cannot do it consistently. You just can't. Observation number 4. Much of Revelation's interpretation is legendary, not biblical, particularly legends of Antichrist and the so-called Battle of Armageddon. Antichrist legends, Antichrist biographies, are fictitious. They are extra-biblical inventions that historically have served to foster Antichrist slander, such as in Luther calling the Pope Antichrist, and so on and so forth, including insidious forms of anti-Semitism, which, for example, drove the Crusaders to massacre Jews on their way to trying to establish New Jerusalem. So what is the Antichrist teaching in the Bible? Well, there's only 4 verses. It's very easy. We can cover it right now. Antichrist in the Bible, 4 verses, 1 John and 2 John. 1 John 2:18, 1 John 2:22, 1 John 4:3, 2 John 7. And what do we learn from John? Love the text. Don't listen to the legends. Don't listen to the biographies. And don't put a capital A on it. Because it's not capital A in John's teaching. What is it in John? Well, number 1, it's realized eschatology. Antichrist have come, John says in 2:18. And he also says in 4:3, now is in the world already. He says Antichrist now is in the world already. That's realized eschatology. That is not futurist eschatology. That's realized eschatology. So number 1, it's realized eschatology from John. Number 2, it is John's exclusive teaching for his community. You have heard that Antichrist is coming. Nobody else went to that seminar. But John's church did. You have heard. We didn't. We don't know what John said. We didn't go to that seminar. We didn't take that class. But he tells them, you have heard. That is a signal that you can only go with what John lets you know in this context, because you didn't go to the seminary. You can't write a biography. Number 3, please get this down. John teaches Antichrist are multiple individuals, because he says many Antichrists have come. It's not one person, not one individual. Many Antichrists have come. Well, how could that be true? Because Antichrist is a heretical spirit that can overtake any teacher or any prophet. Every spirit that does not confess Jesus is Antichrist, John says. So it has to do with heretical teaching. It has to do with false spirit emphasis that leads you into false doctrine. So what is Antichrist? It's realized eschatology for John. It's exclusive to his community. It represents multiple individuals, and in fact, it is defined as a heretical spirit that is not teaching proper Christology. That's Antichrist in the Bible. Anything after that is speculation, legend, myth. Armageddon legends. Legends of a battle of Armageddon, mentioned only once in Revelation 16:14 through 16, but never described, are fictitious inventions that falsify John's Lamb Christology. So this is how God conquers evil in the world. It's one of the proposals. No. It's very interesting in the Bible. Read it. The Battle of Armageddon is never described. So how do you get all of that? Okay, so I conclude with my key takeaway class, my class tonight. Revelation's history of interpretation reveals that we do not interpret the apocalypse. Rather, the apocalypse interprets us. Brandon, I'm done. So,
Thank you, Dr. Stevens. So we do have a little bit of time. I think we're going to use the next 10 minutes, 15 minutes for Q&A. We're going to have a mic. We'll put this mic down here in the middle. Just know this is a question and answer time, so you are limited to one question, and it must be a question. It cannot be a statement. You're not here to teach us tonight, right? And only if Dr. Stevens asks for a response from you, then you can speak twice. And so we will have a mic down here. Michael has it. And if you have a question, line up, please. Come on, guys.
If that's not the Battle of Armageddon, where did we get all of that from?
That is a good point. Where do we get all of that from? That comes from the myth of Antichrist, where the legends developed over the centuries. You can see it building like a snowball, rolling down a hill through the centuries. Antichrist gets a biography, he gets a character, he gets a profile, and so a lot of that comes from this Antichrist legend, this myth that develops in interpretive history. Then, a lot of that is dispensationalism. It comes from the 7-year tribulation period, where there will be this great tribulation, there will be this battle, and that's what is going to bring everything to a conclusion. So it comes from premillennial dispensational teaching, as well as a healthy dose of Antichrist legend.
So none of that is actually in the Bible.
No. No. I'll tell you why. That's a great question. I'll tell you why. Tell you why it's not in the Bible. For example, it was riddled with errors. It said the earliest recorded battle in history was at Megiddo. That is not true. That's false. Know your history. The earliest recorded battle was Sumer and Elam about 2700 BC. Know your history. That's not true. Oh, but boy, it sets up a nice parallel. Earliest battle in history. Oh, we're punctuating history. You hear the periodizing going on? Oh, we're punctuating history. We got the earliest battle and we got the last battle. And along the way, we forgot the gospel. Because I need to ask you the question. Again, how does God conquer evil? And where does militarism get into the picture? Don't forget what I said about Chileism, the very first movement we met. It's Jewish, and let me warn you, it is precisely why the Jews rejected Jesus in the first place. Because he didn't come as their military Messiah. If he rejected it in his first coming, why would he take it on in his second coming? It makes him what I call a schizophrenic Messiah. Jesus cannot answer the question, Jesus, how are you going to conquer evil? And he doesn't know. Because he died on the cross, that didn't work, so I'm going to get some Uzi submachine guns. That might work. You see the problem? To me, it's just really good. But thank you for the question. That's why. Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking earlier about like dual covenants and that whole thing. Can you expand on that? Like, what do you mean? Because like obviously there's like Jews and Gentiles, like for Christians, but like can you explain that more? Because like I'm curious.
Okay, I didn't quite hear it. Help me, baby.
Dual covenants.
Oh, dual covenants. Great question. I'm sitting down because my knees are tiring. Dual covenants. Great question. Because in the New Testament, we have no evidence that there are dual tracks of salvation. Not even in Romans 9. Because what Paul insists at the beginning of Romans, we need to take to heart. In Romans 1, at the introduction, he says, the gospel which was preached beforehand in the prophets. So there's nothing new in the New Testament, I'm sorry to say, if you're Pauline. Because in Romans 1, he said, the gospel which was preached beforehand in the prophets. And boy, you go to Isaiah 53, come on. You go to Psalm 22, come on. Man, there is the gospel in the Old Testament. It's not as clear because Hebrews says, God spoke to us in times past through the prophets and his holy servants, but now he has spoken to us clearly in Jesus Christ. So what are we supposed to learn about Jesus in the future that we don't already know? Because Hebrews says he spoke to us clearly in Jesus Christ. Here's another thing. I love you guys asking questions. It's so much fun. Here's another thing. Think about this too, gang. Look. How does God conquer evil in the world? Well, how is God going to conquer evil in the world? The problem is, we just flat don't like God's way. We really don't. I mean, he tells his son to go out there and spread his arms on a cross. Now, think about this. Revelation 4 and 5. I'm back to the chapel sermon. Revelation 4 is God's sovereignty. Revelation 5 is God's Christ, God's salvation. God's sovereignty, God's salvation. How does God express his sovereignty? It's in Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the sovereignty of God. God is telling you, this is my greatest power. This is my greatest expression of power, of sovereignty. How, God? I'm sending my son, and he will do my will. And you will find nothing in human experience more powerful than doing God's will. That's God's sovereignty. Put Revelation 4 and 5 together. 4 is about God on His throne. That's God's sovereignty. But 5 is about the salvation of His Christ. So how does He express His sovereignty? Listen to the text. Love the text. Let the text speak to you. Let the text teach you the gospel. Okay, so I'm going to sit down again.
All right. So you said that the signs of the times, none of them have happened yet, right? And then previously you had also said that the signs of the times, none of them have happened yet, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
None of them have been correct.
Yes. And then you also said that a lot of the things that happen in Revelation have already been fulfilled in Jesus, like the
Are in the first century with the 7 churches.
Okay, got it. So those happened before the signs?
Yes.
I'm not arguing, I'm not debating.
No. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Interesting. Yeah.
And then you're saying that the white horse was Jesus because the cloak did.
In the first coming. Yeah, I think that's the first coming. I'm way out on a limb on that. Please, check everything you need to check because I'm out on a limb on that. However, I do have all the patristics with me. If you give anything to the church fathers, all the church fathers up through the 400s interpreted Revelation 19 as the cross. So I do have the church fathers behind me.
Next question. Thank you.
In other words, we changed the tradition to take 19 not as the first.
I've never heard that before, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you kind
Close to the mic.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Shorty talking. Sorry. So yeah, as we were saying, I did love how you spent a lot of time talking about how the real focus is on the gospel, as it should be, right? We've been missing that point. I also wanted your take on, the fact remains that Revelation is littered with all sorts of imagery. And I'm going to ask, just based on the assertion that you made on the gospel, how should we then interpret it? Should we interpret it? Should we, how do we deal with it? Because it's still there.
Excellent question. Thank you. Great question. Here's the deal. You interpret the imagery, if I'm correct, I might not be, but if I'm correct, you interpret the imagery as having something to do with the issues of the 7 churches. And so they're dealing with their issues, Domitian and the Roman Empire. Domitian is the one who insisted that he be called Lord and God. Domitian is the one who called himself as Helios, the Son of God, and all this kind of stuff. So we're really getting this emperor worship on steroids with Domitian. We have it a little bit, even all the way back to Augustus. But we have it in Caligula, we have it in Nero, but it really gets on steroids with Domitian, this emperor worship. And this insistence that either you do obeisance to the emperor or you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be in big trouble because all of the people who are in power in Asia Minor, for example, where the 7 churches are big time in collusion with Rome. And so all your power brokers, the mayor of the city, the chief of police, whatever, all your power brokers in a community are Roman. And they're Domitian followers, and they're going to insist. So you go and not pinch incense to Caesar, and you may lose your job because the chief of the silversmiths guild is going to say, I heard that you didn't pinch incense to Caesar. Yeah, well, you no longer have your license. And so they start getting more and more and more pressure. Well, when you get this kind of pressure, your witness is being challenged, and some are sacrificing their witness in order to save their job. Listen to me. Some are sacrificing their witness in order to save their job. That's an issue for the church. And so the visions are apocalyptic imagery that those readers are very familiar with. Like, this audience might be pretty familiar with Harry Potter. Why? Because you just read it a lot. You know, you just read it. You know Harry Potter, and if I mention a name, oh yeah, he was something. You're very trained in that arena of literature. First century readers are very trained in the arena of apocalyptic imagery. So they know that a beast is an emperor or his empire. So the beast coming up out of the sea, where does Rome come from? If Rome comes to you, it has to come across the sea. The beast comes up out of the sea. Who could not understand that as Rome? And so on and so forth. It just goes crazy. And then you learn, for example, you get this beast, this lady, this woman riding a beast that has 7 heads, and the beast is seated on 7 hills. There's only one city in all of history that has ever been called the city of 7 hills. It's Rome. You know, so the imagery, I'm just trying to give you quick examples of, the imagery is not mysterious to those readers in first century church in Asia Minor, in Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamum and Thyatira and Sardis, Laodicea, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. They know this stuff. It's like you know Harry Potter. They're familiar with the imagery. Or like some generation.
Time-wise, we have one more question that we have time for.
Oh, shoot.
Hey, you'll be here after, right? You can answer questions.
One more. Y'all go ahead. Y'all, both of you come. Both of you come. Ignore him. What you got?
So I've heard there's a bit of debate on when the book of Revelation was written. What are your thoughts on that, and how might that relate to your rhetoric views of the 7 churches?
Great question. See, I told you. These are good questions. That's an excellent question. I think that the book of Revelation, a lot of the strong Christian tradition is that the book of Revelation was written by the Apostle John. I don't think so. And I don't, I said, the reaction. And I don't think so for several reasons. But one of them mainly is because the Greek of Revelation is unlike anything that John ever wrote. That the Apostle John ever wrote. Also, because some of the main themes of anything you read that the Apostle John did write, such as the Gospel, are just not there in the book of Revelation. Thirdly, the Apostle John has a realized eschatology. For example, I just read to you where Antichrist stuff comes from. It's realized eschatology. What did it say? And now many Antichrists are in the world. He has a realized eschatology is now. What we're talking about the future is now. Realized eschatology. And the Gospel of John. For whosoever, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. Then go down to John 3:36. For he who does not believe in the Son has, present tense, has been condemned. So it's already decided. It's a realized eschatology. There are a lot of reasons to think that the John of the book of Revelation is not the John who is the apostle. Does that mean that Revelation is not inspired? Absolutely not. It is inspired as long as we recanonize the book. Now understand what I mean by that, gang. We don't need the Apostle John for the Revelation to be canonical. But we do need it to preach the gospel for it to be canonical. So just make sure you get that straight. Authorship is important because if it's written by a prophet John, that explains why you have this knowledge of all of these churches. This is some itinerant prophet who's very familiar with the Asia Minor churches. It also gives you the opportunity to date the book in the time of Domitian and not in the time of like the 70s or 80s, when it makes it much harder to place the images as the empire. So there are a lot of reasons to think that there's a possibility it's not the Apostle John.
But it's still a John, right?
Yes. Self-identified as John. I, John, your brother. So it's some itinerant prophet well known to the communities that he's writing about.
That's all that
Now let's have one more, please.
Okay, so I will say we share like almost identical with your interpretive method. I love you, but
The biggest hurdle text that I've come across in having these discussions with people, especially people who hold to the premillennial view, is 2 Thessalonians 2. Because if I'm not mistaken, 2 Thessalonians 2 is the only text in the New Testament that has both the mentioning of the second coming of Christ, but also an individual who opposes Christ, referred to as the man of lawlessness. So how do we approach that text? It's been the biggest hurdle text I've had.
Yeah, it's a great question. What we do not know is whether that text participates in the apocalyptic genre or just has apocalyptic features. I would say it has apocalyptic features. It's not the apocalyptic genre. For number one, it's not being written like Revelation is written, number one. So it is not apocalyptic. It has apocalyptic features, but it is not apocalyptic as genre. It's not apocalyptic. That instantaneously takes us out of the Revelation circulation pattern already, because that's apocalyptic genre. Number two, Paul's man of sin. If he were talking about Antichrist, he would have said Antichrist. But Antichrist is a Johannine teaching for Johannine churches. And that's why he didn't say Antichrist or anything like that. Number three, so we don't have to say the man of sin is Antichrist. Everybody says that, but I'm saying exegetically, we do not have to say that from that text. Number three, the man of sin is a man of lawlessness. Interestingly enough, at the exact time Paul was writing that, the Roman emperor was promoting laws that even Roman citizens in Rome thought were illegal and lawless. So that raises the possibility that the man of lawlessness is someone who could function within a first century context. But Paul was not necessarily saying it had to happen. He said this is how it could set up. So it may be that he actually is talking about something first century that didn't actually play out. But it does give us an idea of the kind of antipathy there's going to be between believers and those who are against belief in Jesus Christ. There's going to be this antipathy that is going to be resolved only by God. So that you learn that. That's your theological. What do I learn theologically from this passage? Good. Okay, Brandon, you can have it.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's get Dr. Stevens on. Our Dean of Libraries, Reese Powell, has set up to where you can check out books on this topic. Please get around to Dr. Stevens and his wife, Ms. Jean, to say thank you for coming to Carey, and we will see you in the spring on our next topic about the Christian imagination in April. Thank you.